Since our reading today, this making of a whole self, has a sewing metaphor, I thought before delving into the sermon, we'd pause and take note of the extraordinarily beautiful fiber arts that are gracing our sanctuary today. Much thanks to the UUI Fine Arts Committee for arranging the show and to InFiber for sharing their work with us. Suzanne and I also had the pleasure of seeing Judy Pleiss' wonderful quilting work exhibited in Zionsville yesterday. There are just so many talented people here in this congregation and in this community, and I feel very privileged to be able to experience their gifts. I hope you do as well. So a big shout out and a thank you to all the artists who shed the blood, sweat, and tears necessary to the creative process and who make the world a more interesting and beautiful and spirit-filled place with their work. So Nancy Schaefer writes in our reading, "This making of a whole self takes such a very long time. The self is not one thing, once made, unaltered, not midnight task alone, not after other work. It's everything we come upon, make ours. All this fitting of what once was and has become." This is very true of us as individuals, and this is how liberal religion sees us as individuals, as people in a state of discovery, of becoming. We are not trapped in binaries of good and bad, saved and unsaved, lost or found. Rather, we are all of us imperfect but fascinating and beautiful works in progress. And church is a place where we come to assist one another and to be assisted in self-unfolding. This act of creative improvisation called life, this fitting of what once was and has become. It is said that church is a place where we practice being human together, and that is so. And of course, a church community is even more so a thing pieced together, a quilt under continuous construction and expansion. A church community is absolutely formed by the fitting of what once was and has become, and it lives always at the edges, where the dreams and choices and investments of the past must meet and be sown into the hopes and aspirations and energy of the present. And now I have to stop with this metaphor before I make all the quilters in the room mad, because the truth is I don't really know that much about quilting. But it is a strange undertaking, this thing called religious community, where several hundred people, you all, those present and not present, come together voluntarily to inherit and carry forward the dreams and vision of people long past, and to have your dreams connected to them. And then where you all have covenanted and covenant again every Sunday to have your present day dreams, your hearts and hopes connected to the people all around you. And this community includes people who have known each other for 20 years and 20 minutes. People who agree and disagree, people who like each other and maybe not so much with each other, people who want the same things and want very different things. This community that is changing continuously, whose covenant remains the same. In Unitarian Universalism, there are three principles that describe primarily how we want such a community to function, the third, fourth, and fifth principle. They describe a community in which people are free to pursue their own truth and follow the dictates of their own conscience, in which people have a voice and a say, and in which people practice acceptance of one another. So we can all show up here as our authentic selves. On the flip side of these freedoms, we are asked to pursue truth responsibly, mindful that our words and actions have an impact on others. We are asked to take responsibility for the well-being of the community, not just to have a say, but to use our voice. And we are asked to encourage one another to spiritual growth, to accept one another, but also to challenge and inspire one another. Some words that describe the spirit of UU community might be kindness, compassion, generosity, curiosity, supportive, vulnerable, trust. These are lovely words and lovely ideals, but the creation and sustaining of this community is no easy task, and it asks some specific things of us. A few weeks back, I talked about the virtue of faithfulness, of showing up and staying at the table. Today, I want to talk about a specific skill that is vital to the life of religious community, and that is listening. Listening. Listening is a skill. Like any skill, we can seek to understand it and practice it and get better at it. And for the rest of the sermon now, I'm going to get very practical, very nuts and bolts about the art of listening. But remember why we're talking about this and the context. Listening is one means by which we create this community of love and support together. But before we get to listening, I want to say a few words about who we're talking to begin with. Who we're talking to begin with. I want to talk about direct communication. Religious community is founded first and foremost on trust. On trust. And because of this, we really encourage direct communication between people. That is to say, church community works well when people talk to each other rather than about each other. If I have an issue with someone or a question about what someone is doing, it is best to take that issue or that question directly to the people involved. And the exception would be if someone's words or behavior make you feel unsafe or discriminated against or sexually harassed. And then we would ask you to talk directly to myself or Suzanne Hinson-Rieger, our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, or our board president. But otherwise, if you have a question about religious exploration, take it to Suzanne. If you have a concern about worship or ministry, take it directly to me. If you're concerned about something the board is doing, there is a time before each board meeting when you can meet and express that concern. And if you have a question about something someone said in a committee meeting, or you're mad about what they said, or hurt by what they said, or concerned by what they said, we'd ask that you first take it up directly with that person. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, or if you have a direct conversation and you still feel like the issue is unresolved, then I or some other third party could help facilitate a conversation, and we'd be happy to do that. But our covenant as a church community asks us to trust one another enough to engage with one another in a real way, directly and honestly, including those times when we are in disagreement or when we disappoint or even hurt one another, because these things happen. But there are few things that are more damaging to religious community than when people get in the habit of talking about each other rather than with and to each other. Okay, so let's talk about the practice of listening. And by listening, of course, I mean not just auditory hearing, I mean receiving information, so this would apply to sign language as well and similar. Effective listening is a big topic, so we are going to just talk about the basics, the ABCs of good listening. Some of this information is coming from a 4-day conference on conflict and resolution and mediation that I was lucky to attend at IUPUI. Some of this information is coming from the book Listening and Caring Skills by John Savage. But again, there are a million books from which you could receive this information. And I want to start by just naming the difficulty involved in this thing called communication. We want to have a healthy respect for what we are undertaking here. When I communicate to you, however I communicate, and you receive that communication, together we are trying to do what John Savage calls bridge the interpersonal gap. We are trying to bridge the interpersonal gap. Behind any communication I send, there are at least 4 attributes of that message that I alone have direct access to. My thoughts, my feelings, my attitudes, and my intentions. These are private. Only I know what these are. And actually, even I may not know exactly what these are, right? If I'm not that good at self-reflection. But you, the receiver of the message, never have access to these things. I can't do like a Vulcan mind meld and give you like direct experiential access of what's going on inside of me, right? I can only send up a message, and then you have to deduce and infer all these private things that are going on inside of me just from the cues that you have. In face-to-face communication, that would be my words, my tone, and my body language, plus maybe any context you have to help interpret. So listening is always an act of interpretation, of trying to bridge this interpersonal gap. So I'm communicating a message. You are attempting to infer my thoughts, feelings, intentions, attitudes. And you have these 3 channels to work with: my words, my tone, my body language. So someone guess, please, what % of my meaning is conveyed just by the words alone? What % of my meaning? Anyone want to hazard a guess? 10. Very good. 7%. 7%. This is in Savage. It's also in the Complete Mediator's Handbook. This is a generally accepted figure. 7% of my meaning comes from my words alone. 38% comes through the tone of my voice. 55% comes through my body language. So, what does this tell us about email in church life? Okay, email is really great for scheduling things. It is good maybe for summarizing a discussion or listing agreed upon action items after the fact. It might be good for pushing out information to a lot of people all at once. But for discussions, it is not good. Often it is worse than not good. And for emotional discussions, God help you. Whether you believe in many gods, one God, or no God, one of those options help you. Because email is good at communicating information and lousy at communicating meaning. Without tone or body language, that email communicates 7% of your meaning. So here's a good rule of church communication by email. Before you send that email to a dozen people, in response to that thing that happened that you really feel strongly about, first step away from the email for 24 hours. 24 hours. Then come back, read it again with a fresh eye, looking carefully at things like word choice and tone. Then delete the email and meet them for coffee. All right? Yes. All right. In any kind of church communication in which meaning matters, the preference is always for face-to-face communication. Because again, 55% of meaning is coming through body language. If that's not possible, then the next best choice would be phone or maybe FaceTime, Skype, Zoom. The third choice would be to email an adorable kitten picture because, look at the kitten, he's in a tissue box, that's adorable. The fourth choice would be to set your computer on fire because that's probably still preferable than sending that email that you wrote. I would guess texting might be slightly better than email because it's faster and you can add emoticons and stuff, but not by much. So face-to-face and then pick up the phone. Okay, so now we're sitting down face-to-face and we're communicating, right? We're bridging that interpersonal gap. I am talking sincerely and in good faith trying to communicate to you, and you are listening, trying to infer my meaning. So here are some ABCs of good listening now that we're talking face-to-face. First, as best you can, be present. Be present. Turn off your phone or put it away or put it face down. Honor the interaction you're about to have with the person by fully committing to this time with them. Right? You might have a laundry list in the back of your head of all of the things that you know that you need to do. We all have that laundry list. You might be worried or anxious about some problem, and it may be a real problem. Give yourself permission to set those worries down just for this time. They will be waiting for you when you're ready to pick them back up. For the moment you are here interacting with this person in front of you, honor that person and this moment. Allow your body language to be relaxed and open and receptive, right? Tightly crossed arms, tapping foot, eyes darting about the room, body turned away. Right? That's not receptive or welcoming signals. Eye contact is good for reading other people's expressions, if nothing else, but sometimes if someone is non-neurotypical, if they have anxiety or just shyness, eye contact is not going to work for them. It may not work for you, so that's okay if that's the case. As you're listening, resist the urge to formulate a response to what is being said. A lot of times when someone is talking, we are like half listening and half drafting our own witty rejoinder or our indignant defense. Or, we're reminded of what you said of that one time we were in a cab with Gary Busey and we're just like dying to tell that story. That's totally natural and human. But in good active listening, we are focused on being attentive to what the other person is saying rather than on what we are going to say in response. And this is especially difficult if someone is saying something critical or negative to us or about us, because that naturally provokes defensiveness, right? Our inner lawyer gets in gear and we start marshaling the facts of our case. So when that happens, breathe. Trust that you will have your time to share. And it might help to name the emotion as it arises, right? You can say, all right, I feel myself being defensive. or I feel myself being angry, or I'm hurt right now, right? You can observe it and name it, and then breathe and let it go. Keep your mind focused on hearing and understanding what is being said. And sometimes this really does take an act of concentration, and that's, again, is a skill that you can practice. If you feel you missed something during a moment when you were having emotion, there's nothing wrong with asking the person to repeat themselves. But the goal is to be fully present to and fully attentive of the other person's meaning in the fullness of its expression. Now, we could actually stop here because in the context of religious community, this is already a very powerful thing. If we can fully commit to our time with one another, if we can honor one another with our full presence, and if we can listen deeply and attentively, this is a powerful thing. This is a gift that we can give each other. There's a form of UU small group ministry called Chalice Circles that is premised just on this practice, just on the power of this form of listening alone. Chalice Circles are small groups, usually about 10 people, who commit to meet regularly for a period of several months to share about meaningful life topics, right? You're given a topic. People take turns sharing, and the focus is just sharing and listening. One person shares and the group listens. And there might be time allowed later for some follow-up questions, but the focus is really not on dialogue. It's definitely not on debate. Rather, Chalice Circles are a time for us to practice and experience deep listening. And this kind of deep listening is a spiritual practice that reflects our UU principles. Because Chalice Circles allow us to practice holding space for one another, a space in which each person is not just heard, but heard with compassion and kindness and curiosity. And if this sounds good to you, there will be new Chalice Circles forming in the fall, and I hope you will check them out. Back to our ABCs of active listening. You've listened attentively to the other person without formulating your own response. They've finished talking. It's your turn. This might be a good time for to check your understanding. A simple tool for better listening is just to paraphrase back to the person what you heard so that you can check that you got it right. And this can be simple as saying, I hear you saying you're frustrated that our committee has not made a decision about this issue. This gives the other person the chance to correct any misunderstandings. I'm not frustrated, I'm angry. It also gives you time now to formulate your response, right? Because you've created this pause. Okay, and obviously you're not going to do this all the time in casual conversation because you don't want to sound like a parody of a therapist from a 70s movie, right? Like, I hear what you're saying, right? But if there's a point of conflict, or there's an important idea on the table, or there's an action that needs to be taken, it really is worth taking the time to check everyone's understanding. And in a disagreement or an argument, especially one-on-one argument, it can be really eye-opening to have each side take turns sharing the other person's perspective, right? Say what you think the other person is saying, and they say what they think you're saying, and this can lead to some real, wait, is that what you hear me saying kind of comments? Because sometimes we're not hearing each other accurately at all. And this can really clarify that when you take the time to restate each other's positions best as you understand it. Again, honestly, right? Not like, well, I hear what you're saying is I guess I should just go away and stop breathing. Right? That's not like that, but honestly. Okay, related to checking understanding is checking emotion. Because so much communication is nonverbal, we're often deducing someone's emotional state from a variety of cues. It's easy to get that wrong, which can lead to significant misunderstandings. So you might say as a check, it seems like you're angry right now. Is that right? And then they can say, yes, actually I am angry, or no, I'm not, or whatever it is. People don't always know what they're feeling, so just even raising the question might help people identify the emotion in the room. And naming that can be the powerful step towards a resolution. And on the flip side of this, as a speaker, it can sometimes be helpful to directly tell people how you are feeling so that they don't have to guess. So consider this simple statement, I wish I had more information. Okay, I wish I had more information. How many emotional states could be associated with that statement, I wish I had more information? I could be angry, I could be impatient, I could be anxious, I could be curious, excited, cautious, confused, or I could just have no emotion at all. But if I say, I'm frustrated because I wish I had more information, then you don't have to guess what's going on with me. And unidentified or misidentified emotions can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. So a simple emotional check, seems like you're sad right now, is that right? Can really help with communication. And it's important to remember that emotions are not right or wrong, they're not good or bad, they just are. Some topics are going to be emotional. Based on people's life experiences, something that's of academic interest to me might be life or death to someone else, right? So there can even be a real emotional mismatch between how emotional something is for me and how emotional it is for you. And it's important to recognize that people have different levels of comfort with that. And there can be a strong cultural component to this as well. Some cultures express a lot of high emotion in discussion, others shy away, right? I was raised Midwestern, so I understand that emotions are meant to be suppressed. Other cultures, much more expressive. So even just recognizing that level of discomfort can facilitate communication. Respect your limits, don't shut people down emotionally, but also there's nothing wrong with taking a time out in a conversation. And finally, last thing that we'll talk about today, something that can be helpful in a disagreement, especially if the disagreement is over a course of action or a decision, is to have each person identify their underlying interests. And this might mean literally get out a piece of paper, divide it into columns for each person, and have each person literally write down what is important to them about the issue that you're talking about. Because when people can see what everyone's interests are laid out, you can see where's the overlap. You can identify the commonalities. You can say, oh, yeah, I didn't think of that. Of course, that is also important to me. And you can work better towards a shared solution. So that's a lot of technical stuff. That's a lot of nuts and bolts of listening. But we do it, we practice it, because religious community is a place where we practice being human together, where we hold space for one another's unique unfolding of self. It is a place where we encourage one another to open up to our true self, open up to the possibilities that exist in community, open up to that which is larger than ourselves. And we do it together. As the poet Kim Stafford said about the raindrop and the bubble, they took so long falling down and soaring up they grew. The bubble swelled and filled with light. The raindrop gathered, ready and round. Somehow they were aimed for the exact same moment in time and they got there together. Then they were, what were they? The bubble opened and was the whole sky. The raindrop opened and was the whole ocean. There they were, sky and ocean, turning right where they belonged. And you and I, we got here together too, didn't we? We got here safe in the silver light where we belong. May this be a place where we can each belong, where we become whole sky, whole ocean, where we arrive at the right moment and get there together, in acceptance and encouragement of one another, in listening and in love. May it be so, and amen.